This is going to be a relatively long one. Grab a drink, buckle yourself in, and get comfortable. Last night, the 14th of January 2019, I woke at 5 in the morning with a horrible sensation of not being able to breathe properly. A reasonable person would probably have taken this as a sign of some difficulties with the heart, a cause for great concern and an immediate evacuation to the halls of healing provided by our health services. Not me though. I engaged in deep breathing until it passed, and then I fell asleep again, and woke with the mind-shattering sound of my alarm clock going off 3 hours later. A reasonable person would probably consider my action in this instance to be of some concern, a sign that I am not taking my health seriously. The truth of the matter is that I am used to waking up like this. There is a lingering subconscious panic and dread somewhere in the dark recesses of my unconscious psyche still. A vague voice whispering that I am not yet, for lack of a better word, fulfilled. Of course, these nocturnal bouts of panic and doom has lessened immensely over the course of the past 2 years. Prior to this, it happened every night and was far more severe. Every night for 2 years I woke with what can only be described as night terrors, and could not get back to sleep no matter how much I tried. The confusion and pure panic in those moments made me fear and avoid sleep as much as I could. Sometimes not going to bed at all, but clinging to being awake as though my life depended on it. And maybe it did. At the very least, I believe my sanity, or what little was left of it in those fabled days of yore, depended upon it. Sitting like that, alone at night, with nothing for comfort but YouTube and my own random racing thoughts, gave me a lot of room to think. Probably too much room to think. It also granted me the ability, over time, to control my thoughts and fracturing mind. Not as good as I would wish, but better than it have ever had or has been. Some good came of it, even if I spent 3 years, give or take, in a state of constant agitation and panic. It put me on a path I desperately needed to be put upon, though I did not know it at the time. For a multitude of years I had been going to therapy, and their way of helping me was to put me on drugs, and more drugs. I was given drugs to counteract the side effects of the other drugs I was on, and new drugs to combat the effects of those drugs, which were meant to combat the effects of the other drugs. An entire multicolored galaxy of uppers, downers, screamers and streamers to keep me sane. That is, to keep me numb and burnt out. To keep my mind from being my mind. Due to the amount of drugs and the relatively young age at which I was given these, they halted my emotional development and put my life dead in its tracks for several years. Nothing happened. I was sitting in stasis, gaining weight and gaining pessimism and gaining an ever-expanding sense of frustration in regards to my life, or lack of life. This frustration was very much subconscious, but manifested in several severely self-destructive ways, which, of course, made a psychiatrist give me more drugs. The circle was complete, and the damage was done. And the damage still lingers. At the time, of course, I believed that the fault for my life going absolutely nowhere was that of my own and my mind, fractured and ruined as I had been told that it was from seeing shrink after shrink since I was 15 years old, and my teenage temperament, all gloomy depression and confused anxiety, was treated as a severe mental illness. Thus, being told half my life that there was something wrong with me meant that there had to be something wrong with me. In essence, I was brought up into illness by the humdiddle school of psychology. This is, of course, not to say that I am not responsible for the poor choices I have made. Because of course I am. My actions and choices were and are my own. There are contributing factors, however, and a lot of those contributing factors stemmed from the psychiatric dissolution of myself through drugs supposed to help me along the way, but who at their core halted my core from growing and developing roots which would gain sustenance from myself. Instead of aiding my growth, they halted my growth. Instead of making me better, they made me worse. Diagnosis after diagnosis was thrown at me, and nothing seemed to stick. No diagnosis was correct, and yet I was given medications to treat the diagnoses which I did not have, time and again. Faulty diagnosis, medication. Faulty diagnosis, medication. And then, of course, medication to combat the effects of other medications. Whenever a certain diagnosis was shown to be wrong, they did not halt the drugs given for that diagnosis. They conjured forth a new diagnosis and gave me drugs for that as well. My medical journal is a confusing mess, as was my life at the time, mirroring it perfectly, all jumbled and confused and frustrating. I could go on about this, but I won't. I think I have gone on for long enough. I plan to expand on this and my experience in quitting medication and psychology at some later point. Maybe as a book, maybe as a series of blog posts, probably both. Suffice it to say, I learned a lot from this experience through clawing my way through hell. Now, the reason I am bringing all this up is very simple. It has to do with the mental health, or lack thereof, of boys and men. Or, more to the point, the lack of proper mental health services for men and boys. In particular, since traditional masculinity, that is to say, masculinity at all, is now considered both pathological and as an ideology, whatever the fuck that means, by the powers that be. How, then, can a man trust to a mental health service when it deems masculinity itself to be at the root of all issues a man face? What men are told, then, when seeking counseling, is that he is ill for the simple reason that he is a man. That if he only stopped being masculine, as nature has made him, he would be better. I cannot conceive of how that would help him in any way, shape or form. Picture this scenario. Therapist. So, what's bothering you? Patient. Well, I am feeling suicidal. My life is going nowhere. I can't find employment and I can't find any field of study to enter. Therapist. Why do you think that is? Patient. Well, they have these gender quotas that is favoring women in my chosen field. And due to this, I cannot find employment or somewhere to study despite being qualified and having tons of experience. Therapist. Do you think this is a bad thing? Patient. Well, yes. I think the ones that are most qualified should get the job. Therapist. Do you not think women are qualified to work in your field? Patient. Not when I am more qualified than they are, no. Therapist. That, I think, is your male privilege speaking. You are so used to getting the world handed to you on a platter due to being a man, and now you are struggling to comprehend this loss of privilege. Patient. What? No, I don't think that is... Therapist. Why are you so scared of gender equality? Now, of course, this is probably a case of hyperbole on my part, but it drives the point home. Imagine seeking help due to self-loathing and suicidal tendencies, and then being told that your very nature is the cause of your issues. And then being told that it is not even your nature, but a social construct, a supposed ideology of masculinity that has sown the seeds of your discontent. Now imagine being a young man, or a boy, seeking counsel and guidance for the same, impressionable as all hell and confused from the raging tide of hormones which only puberty can bring. This therapy and poor counsel can only breed more confusion. You are not you, they seem to say. Your nature is not in your nature. Moreover, that which is not your nature and which is not you, but which you still cling to and which still defines you, is toxic and destructive at its core and need to change. And this change, it seems, is not to help you grow, but to help the rest of the world grow. Through counseling, you are beat into servitude, one phony concerned sentence at a time, smooth as a serpent's hiss, all forked tongue and whispered promises of betterment. If only you would understand your inherent toxicity and privilege, all would be well. Considering that men are the group most at risk for suicide, this does not bode well for the future of men. This is not science. This is ideology parading around town masquerading as science. It is beautifully crafted, vile hatred of men and masculinity clothed as great concern for boys and men. I cannot even begin to fathom how telling a young man who is struggling with suicidal urges, or a grown man for that matter, that the fundamental reason for his suicidality is, in essence, his fundamental being, his very core. Couple this with a constant reminder, through mass media, through social media, through schools and educations, politics and parliament, through jobs and through parents, siblings, friends and family, that men are inherently bad, that there is something wrong with men, that men need to change for the betterment of all. You've got a recipe for disaster, either individually, personal and private, or socially, public and societal. Not only is a man told that he needs to change, he is told that he needs to change for the good of all, not for the good of himself. That his own emotional well-being takes the back seat to the emotional well-being of the world, and that his hurt hurts the world more than it hurts himself. He does not matter, even when it is his well-being that he pays with blood and sweat and tears to be guided towards. What he is supposed to say is quite simple. Serviam. I will serve. At the expense of myself, I will serve. Which is, honestly and funnily enough, the traditional expectations levied at men all the way from the beginning of time. What was that about the ideology of masculinity, the toxicity of traditional masculinity? It seems we have gone full fruitless circle once again. Now, imagine a girl or young woman going into therapeutic sessions and being told this, that her very nature is what is wrong with her. Can you imagine what levels of foaming at the mouth and crotch outrage we would have seen then? And I would like to add, rightly and justly so. My school of thought is that everyone should be treated equally, regardless of gender or sexuality or color of skin or what have you. This, it would seem, is not the school of thought which these self-proclaimed fighters for equality and justice for all is following. This is, of course, not to say that people should not strive to be the best they can be. Bettering oneself and growing as a human being is of incredible importance, and gazing ever inwards deeply and laboriously is an important tool in doing just that. Know thyself, as the saying goes. When we have a cultural zeitgeist telling men, and only men, that they are flawed and need to change, however, we are at a loss of balance. Self-improvement is not gendered, nor is faults and flaws. Every individual, regardless of gender, has faults and flaws and room for improvement. Letting the faults of the world rest solely on the shoulders of one group is disingenuous at best and pure vicious malice at worst. The outrage at claiming there is something wrong with the very nature of women would be immense. Of this I think there is little doubt. Claiming that there is something wrong with the very nature of men, however, is equality and justice made manifest. A social justice fever dream conjured forth from a mass brainwashed collective psychosis, engineered and finely crafted over decades. The genders should be treated equally, and so we must teach men that there is something wrong with men. We must teach our societies that there is something wrong with men and nothing wrong with women. In the name of equal treatment, summed up thusly, men bad, women good. For equality, for justice, for truth and mad pathology, one for one and all for one. Now, picture a young man, confused by the hormones coursing through his body at the peak of puberty, confused by a troubled upbringing perhaps, or the loss of a loved one, or a lack of direction. Maybe only confused by life itself and in need of some guidance and some help to overcome some obstacle or other. And so he seeks counseling. He seeks therapy, if only to gain some perspective or to vent his frustrations to someone whose job it is to understand and lend an empathetic and helpful ear. Someone who gets paid to help someone overcome difficult obstacles. And he vents. He opens up. He tells all. And is told that the reasons he feels like this is that he is conditioned to not feel. That he has been cast in the mold of oppressor and tyrant by a society which apparently only has his best interests in mind. That he should cast aside his notions of who he is and replace it with who his therapist thinks he should be. And who his therapist thinks he should be is far detached from the reality of who he, by nature, is. And who his therapist thinks he is, tyrant and oppressor, privileged and pampered, is far detached from the reality of who he, by nature, is. Now, would not this cause more confusion? Would not this fester in his mind like a tumour, growing and growing more and more the more he is told that he is at fault for his own issues by virtue of his birth? Mix the condemnation levied at men and masculinity by the educational system which he is forced through into the mix. Toss the misandry imposed upon him through the news which he absorbs and the girls in his class into the cauldron, Stoke the fires with politicians telling him that he is evil incarnate and that he has had no real issues to worry about, and that he should bend the knee to help girls and to help women overcome the obstacles which he is directly or indirectly responsible for, by privilege inherent from birth. And now bring it to a boil with a family which tells him the same. Burn out. Wash out. Done and dusted. Cleared, cleaned, clinically insane. And this is what our culture celebrates. A constant demonizing of men for the perceived benefit of not the men in question, but the world around them. And we dare paint this travesty as being of benefit to boys and men. We dare paint it as a major benefit, which sees boys and young men dropping out and burning out, not participating nor launching, but washing up on the dust and cobweb-bedecked shores of our cultural wasteland. Any voices raised by the boys and men in question, or by others concerned, in opposition to the proposition that boys and men need to be socially engineered into useful objects, helpful to all but themselves, is shouted down and held forth as a shining example of exactly why we need this misandric turn of page and phrase, this hatred disguised disgustingly as concern. It is a lose-lose situation, for boys and men. What the claim is of course, oh no, it's not all men, excepting of course when the same voices shine through the fog with a beacon saying #yes all men. It's just the bullies and the rapists, the harassers and the violent carriers of toxicity, of the virus of masculinity. If you should feel offended by the message, it means you are one of them, and so you prove the point of the message. Clever. Very clever. It's that worldwide emotional manipulation poking its bedazzled head out of the sand again, turning the victim into the victimizer. Agree with the message, and you are a good man, and it is your job to stop other men behaving toxically. Object to the message, and you are one of the bad men and proof that the message need be told. One man is responsible for the actions of all men, which is to say that all men are responsible for the actions of one man. When that action is bad, that is. Flip the script and you will learn that one woman is not responsible for the actions of all women, and that all women are not responsible for the actions of one woman. If they are bad. If they are good, it is a cause for celebration of all women. Women good, men bad. The bad done by one man is proof of the wickedness of all men. The good done by one woman is proof of the kindness of all women. Nuance is dead. Both men and women have the same capacity for both good and evil. This is forgotten in the gender wars and the propaganda of the language therein. A man cannot win either way. Either we need to change, or we need to make other men change. To serve and to please, to serve and to protect. Or to kill ourselves in the process. To fail at life and withdraw into the nothing, into the ether. To be drugged unconscious and met with naught but disdain in the public and the private sphere, and being met with naught but distrust and blame and shame when we seek therapy and understanding from medical professionals whose very job is to help and aid, and then to be force-fed a multitude of drugs to suppress our nature, quite literally being turned into mindless, inactive zombies incapable of participating in any way, shape or form. The result is a generation of boys and men, turned away at the gates of life, denied the respect and compassion, understanding and empathy which they deserve. An entire generation of boys and men being taught from birth that there is something genuinely wrong with who they are at their very core. This, one would assume, is not proper behavior towards any group of people. And one would be right in assuming this. Such as it is, our societies need their sacrificial goat, their idol to be shouted at and despised and blamed for the ills of the fracturing world we see before us, and simultaneously being told to fix it, both God and devil. It is a mass communal unleashing of frustration and the Jungian shadow of humanity itself. The evil and vindictive force within us all. Men are the only group in society upon which this vindictiveness, this hatred, this frustration and this perplexing shadow of our souls and psyches may be unleashed with impunity. And they dare label it as compassion and concern for boys and men. Don't believe it? Try throwing the same vile abuse and ever-changing demands for change at any other group in our splintering culture, and see how far that gets you. Try telling women as a group that they need to change. Or blacks, or Muslims, or Jews, or homosexuals. Pick and choose, and see how far you get before the armies come marching at you from the virtuous anthill of the chronically concerned and offended. This hatred and abuse gets internalized by the boys and young men in question, creating ever more need for therapy and psychiatric assessments of their being and of their ruptured psyche. Yet another of those vicious and vacuous circles manufactured by our daycare societies, and being met with drugs, disbelief and disillusioning tales of their inherent privilege and propensity for oppression and toxicity and therapeutic sessions from beyond the wide-eyed wonder of the mass-manufactured concern trolling of this noxious fume of feminist indoctrination. They come to believe in the evil of their being. And the mood changes, the mood spirals ever downwards, and, in lieu of understanding, they are given more drugs, causing the mood to descend further into the abyss. And the abyss opens wide to engulf them and swallow them whole. Perpetually lost boys floating aimlessly in a continuing vacuum, emotionally flatlined by neurotoxins and with a growing rage and resentment for which there is no release, no understanding, and no help. And as men are drawn towards action in times of personal crisis, they reach a breaking point and lash either outwards or inwards, drawing from the core of their being the masculine call to action which has been suppressed and denied and labelled as inherently toxic. They snap, as one does who has stared into the abyss for far too long. Manifested most often in self-harm and self-destruction, or, more visibly destructive to society as a whole, it manifests as them taking others down with them in a blaze of fire and fury. This is where you get your mass shooters and mass murderers, your poster boys for toxicity and hatred. And then, refining and re-engineering the circle once again, this is a call for the media to write articles on what is wrong with masculinity, holding these individuals forth as definite proof of the fact that there is something fundamentally wrong and defective with boys and men. Not showing the least bit of concern for the tragedy which happened and having no qualms in using it as a tool to push ever more anti-male sentiments, stoking the fires already burning under the feet of the young boys and men which are doomed to failure and bound to lose in a society whose blatant hatred of them is veiled as concern for their well-being. Imagine for a moment what would have happened if these young men were shown compassion, understanding and empathy instead of ridicule and scorn. Instead of being labelled as incels or virgin losers by feminism's doctrine when they voiced their opposition, or being marked by birth with a sign of the devil, a swinging cock and balls eternally flagellating the poor oppressed under their naturally oppressive nature. Ave, ave, feministas. This doctrine creates men there is something wrong with. Men ruined and broken by a society which claimed to care equally for all, but which shows time and again that it cares nothing at all for men and for boys. A society in which men and boys are told to man up in order to help women and to attack their brothers for perceived trespasses on the virtue of women. Men, you need to help women. Women, you need to help other women. No one needs to help men. They can help themselves by bending the knee and helping women and only women. That is to say, as stated time and again, by helping feminism and only feminism. Not only that, they are also told that manning up is proof of toxic masculinity, the suppression of feelings inherent in the toxicity. So man up and help, and don't man up and help by not manning up. Only express your feelings in a way suitable to feminism's gold standard, meaning express our feelings about men and masculinity and share our emotions. I have stared into the abyss of self-loathing myself, for years upon years, indoctrinated into the eternal victim cult, being reminded over and over that it is me and only me that is at fault, that my being is wrong, defective, destructive and hateful. I have been told that we live in a society in which women are oppressed, and I have seen time and again how this is not the case. Yet I could not see through the veil across my eyes, nor could I break away from the choke chain around my neck. I considered quotas and affirmative action a necessity, proof of women's oppression, when it is, in fact, proof of quite the opposite. Preferential treatment is not proof of oppression. One being treated better than the other, at the expense of the other, I might add, is not proof of the other oppressing the one. It is proof of the one being treated far better than the other by the other, which is claimed to treat the one worse. And yes, the words one and other are used with a purpose in mind. We are othering boys and men, turning them into second-class citizens to be treated with mistrust. And if not mistrust, then downright fear and loathing. And we are turning women into the one, a saving force and perpetual grace, an aristocracy which we must never contradict, never oppose, under pain of social death. As with most boys and men, I lashed inwards as the abyss stared back into me. And as a result of lashing inwards, I was dragged into oblivion, balancing on a razor blade and tiptoeing through existence with no goals, no mind, no motives, no nothing. Psychopharmaceuticals scorched my neural pathways and burnt a hole into my mind whose damage still lingers with me, running through my mind and my body in white scorching lines manifesting as chronic pain and chronic fatigue. Still burnt out, 4 years after ending my days as a drug mule for the pharmaceutical bliss of our unempathetic psychiatrists' offices. And I am pissed off. Rightfully so. My days of lashing inwards is drawing to an end. I employ the pen and what little energy I still have left to explore ideas and to lash outwards in a more cerebral manner, employing what explosive energy might linger in the core of my being in an attempt to change minds and inspire others to do the same, to partake in the battle of ideas we are caught up in. We need to show that we deserve respect and understanding, compassion and empathy, and we must stand still and strong in this storm. And in standing still, we move ever forwards on our path to make our societies understand that boys and men need to be met with empathy and understanding, not ridiculed, shunned, feared and blamed when opening up. We need to turn this tide, and we need to stand together to do so. What differences we may have in our core values, traditional or non-traditional, conservative or liberal, etc., etc., need to be forgotten and put aside for the moment, so that we can focus our energies towards a greater good, showing that masculinity is inherently good and that men are inherently good. Cooperation across the board is what we need. There is a mass awakening to be done. Imagine if boys and men were met with empathetic ears and, through action, shown that it is in fact our current cultural zeitgeist that is flawed at its core, not them. We would see far less mass shootings, far less men snapping, far less men committing suicide. Feminist doctrine have created a self-fulfilling prophecy in their toxic masculinity narrative, and, I suspect, they are intensely pleased with themselves about this fact. Men and boys need to support other men and boys, and we need to stop internalizing the constant feedback loop of hostility and negativity we are met with. Make the feminists live by their own rules by stating, quite simply, if you believe that the genders should be treated equally, then you ought to start treating the genders equally. Or do not engage at all. There is no use in debating someone who has no interest in listening, whose only concern is to speak and to have their voices heard at the expense of the voice of others. If something is okay to be said about men in general, then it is also okay to be said about women in general. If it is not suitable to be said about women in general, then it is not suitable to be said about men in general. Use their rulebook against them. Do not internalize hatred. Be strong. Be proud. Be yourself. And never let anyone condition you into believing that your masculinity is toxic. Stand still, holding a candle of self-respect to your heart and whisper to yourself, non serviam, I will not serve. For the sake of myself, I will not serve.